I was standing on my own cabin porch when a sheriff's deputy ordered me away from my own front door. My father's brass key was still in my hand, yet the woman pointing at me insisted I was breaking in. Somehow, Karen had called the police before I even reached the lock, and I was the one who looked like the criminal. What I didn't know then was that this fight had never been about a cabin. It was about a single key, and who controlled everything behind that door. I inherited my cabin outside Red Pine Ridge, Colorado, after my father passed away, and the probate court recorded the deed in my name without a single dispute. Before I carried the first box inside, I changed the smoke detector batteries, tested every window latch, photographed every room, and scanned every property document into secure cloud storage. Years designing commercial security systems had taught me one simple rule. If something ever went wrong, evidence mattered more than opinions. My father had another rule that stayed with me even longer. He always handed me the old brass cabin key and said, "Keys can be copied. Character cannot." I kept that key on my ring even after installing a modern deadbolt, because it reminded me that the cabin was part of my family, not just another piece of real estate. The place sat just outside the neighborhood governed by the Pine Ridge Highlands Homeowners Association. My driveway crossed a recorded easement, but the cabin itself had never been subject to the association's rules. I confirmed that with the county records before I spent $1 repairing the property. The survey map, title insurance policy, and recorded deed all matched perfectly. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it became the beginning. The first sign of trouble appeared 3 weeks later when I found a neatly folded envelope tucked under my front door. Inside was a welcome packet from the Homeowners Association signed by its president, Linda Mercer. The last page requested that every homeowner provide a spare key for emergency access. I read the document twice before comparing it with the recorded covenants attached to my title. There was no such requirement because my cabin was not part of the association in the first place. Rather than ignore it, I drove to the monthly board meeting carrying copies of my deed and survey. Linda smiled politely until I explained that I appreciated the welcome, but would not be surrendering a key to property outside the association. Her smile stayed exactly the same, but her tone changed. She told everyone that refusing to cooperate created unnecessary risks for the community. I calmly slid my survey across the table and pointed to the property line. She barely looked at it before sliding the papers back toward me. "Every cabin up here follows the same safety policy," she said. "You will too." I thanked the board, gathered my documents, and left without raising my voice. The next morning, I returned to replace an old porch light and noticed something that made me stop halfway up the steps. A fresh scratch surrounded the front lock, and tucked beneath the welcome packet on my porch was a second envelope informing me that the association had already scheduled an inspection requiring access to the inside of my cabin. I did not unlock the cabin that afternoon. Instead, I folded the inspection notice, photographed both sides, and slipped it into a plastic document sleeve. Then I walked the entire property line with my phone, recording continuously. The scratch marks around the deadbolt were fresh enough that tiny flakes of brass still clung to the porch boards. Whoever had tested the lock had done it recently, and they had stopped before causing real damage. That mattered because intent and timing often told a clearer story than fingerprints ever could. Before driving home, I called the county planning office and confirmed once again that my parcel remained outside the Pine Ridge Highlands Homeowners Association. The clerk emailed me an updated parcel map and the recorded declaration showing exactly where the association boundary ended. My cabin sat almost 100 feet beyond it. I printed the records, highlighted the legal description, and delivered copies by certified mail to the Homeowners Association office. 3 days passed without a response. On the fourth morning, I received an email from Linda Mercer thanking me for my cooperation and reminding me that the inspection would proceed as scheduled. The message attached a document titled Master Emergency Access Policy. It looked official at first glance, complete with the association logo and board signatures, but something immediately caught my attention. The policy claimed it had been adopted 8 years earlier. The logo printed across the top had only been introduced 2 years ago after the association changed management companies. Someone had reused a newer template and assigned it an older date. That contradiction was too obvious to ignore. Rather than accuse anyone of fabricating documents, I contacted the association's former management company listed in archived county records. The retired manager answered after a few rings and surprised me with a simple statement. He had never heard of any policy requiring owners to surrender cabin keys, and he remembered that my property had always been excluded from the association because of its separate access easement. Before hanging up, he emailed me several archived newsletters from his time managing the community. None mentioned mandatory key collection. I believed I had enough information to stop the issue before it grew worse. I was wrong. The following Saturday, I drove to the cabin expecting a quiet weekend of replacing old kitchen cabinets. Instead, I found a white inspection tag hanging from my front doorknob. Someone had already marked the inspection as completed even though I had never granted access. There were check marks beside items that could only have been verified from inside the cabin, including smoke detectors, electrical outlets, and water heater placement. I unlocked the door and immediately noticed nothing appeared missing, but one detail refused to leave my mind. Sitting on the kitchen counter was a business card from a local locksmith I had never hired, and handwritten across the back were 4 words that turned a paperwork dispute into something far more serious. Duplicate key completed yesterday. I turned the locksmith's business card over 3 more times before slipping it into an evidence envelope from my truck. The handwriting looked rushed, but the company logo was clear enough for me to identify the shop within minutes. I locked the cabin, photographed the untouched kitchen exactly as I had found it, and drove straight into town. I did not accuse anyone of making an illegal copy of my key. Instead, I asked the owner whether one of his technicians had accidentally left a business card at my property. He studied the card for several seconds before calling his office manager into the room. She immediately recognized the handwriting and quietly admitted that one of their mobile technicians had visited Pine Ridge Highlands the previous afternoon after receiving what she believed was an authorized request from a homeowners association representative. My stomach tightened, but I kept my voice steady. I asked one question. Did anyone verify that the person requesting the duplicate actually owned the cabin? The owner frowned and disappeared into his back office. When he returned, he carried the original work order. The customer's signature line did not contain my name. It read Property Access Coordinator. There was no deed, no identification, and no written authorization from the homeowner attached to the file. The owner apologized repeatedly and explained that his technician had duplicated only the exterior key because he had been told the association maintained emergency access for every cabin. He immediately offered to deactivate the invoice and cooperate if the matter became legal. I requested certified copies of every document instead of arguing. As I walked back to my truck, the first major piece of the puzzle finally fit together. Nobody had stolen my original key. Somebody had convinced a licensed locksmith that they already possessed the legal authority to create another one. That changed everything. The problem was no longer protecting a piece of brass. The entire trust behind my lock had been compromised. On my way back to the cabin, I stopped at the county sheriff's office, not to file criminal charges, but to ask how deputies normally handled access disputes involving private property. The deputy at the public counter explained that law enforcement generally relied on ownership records and immediate circumstances, not homeowners association preferences. He also advised me to document every interaction because false claims about access rights often became civil disputes before they became criminal investigations. That conversation confirmed I needed a stronger strategy than simply replacing another deadbolt. Late that afternoon, I parked near the cabin without pulling into the driveway. From a distance, I watched Linda Mercer speaking with 2 board members near the entrance road. One of them held a thick ring loaded with keys that reflected the afternoon sun. Linda accepted the ring, removed one key, compared it with a sheet of paper on a clipboard, then handed it back with a satisfied smile. She was not collecting emergency keys for a handful of willing owners. She appeared to be organizing an entire system around controlling access. Before I could quietly leave, my phone buzzed with a security alert from the temporary motion sensor I had installed inside the cabin that morning. Someone had just opened my front door while I was standing nearly 300 yards away watching Linda. I stayed where I was instead of running toward the cabin. Years of designing security systems had taught me that people often destroyed the best evidence by reacting too quickly. I opened the monitoring application on my phone and watched the live feed from the temporary camera I had hidden above the kitchen cabinets while replacing the smoke detector. The picture was clear enough to show two people inside the cabin. One wore a maintenance vest. The other was Linda Mercer. Neither appeared to be searching for valuables. Linda walked directly to the hallway closet, unlocked it with a freshly cut key, and pointed toward the utility panel while the maintenance worker wrote notes on a clipboard. They behaved like they believed they had every right to be there. I quietly recorded the live video from my phone onto a second device to preserve an independent copy before calling my attorney instead of confronting them. His advice surprised me. He told me not to enter the cabin while unauthorized people were still inside because a heated confrontation could blur the legal issues and give the association an opportunity to claim I had interfered with an official inspection. Instead, he instructed me to document when they arrived, when they left, and every vehicle involved. 20 minutes later, Linda locked my front door with the duplicate key, slipped it into her purse instead of returning it to the maintenance worker, and drove away. That single action changed my priorities. I was no longer dealing with an unauthorized inspection. Someone outside my family now possessed a working key to my cabin. The following morning, I met my attorney at the property. After reviewing the video, he pointed out something I had overlooked. The maintenance worker never opened a single cabinet or tested any equipment. He simply copied serial numbers from appliances and photographed every room. My attorney believed the inspection itself was merely a pretext. The real objective appeared to be creating a detailed inventory of the cabin while establishing a pattern of claiming authorized access. That afternoon, he drafted a formal cease and desist letter demanding that the Homeowners Association immediately return every duplicate key, identify everyone who had entered my property, and preserve all related records. We sent the letter by overnight delivery and electronic mail. Linda responded within hours, not through a lawyer, but through another board memorandum. She denied possessing any unauthorized key and claimed the association maintained access only for community safety. Attached to her response was a schedule listing future annual inspections, including my cabin by address, even though it remained outside the association boundaries. Then came the document that completely changed my strategy. Tucked behind the schedule was a form titled Emergency Access Authorization bearing what appeared to be my signature. It authorized the association to retain a permanent key and enter my cabin whenever board members considered it reasonably necessary. I had never signed that document, but someone expected other people to believe that I had. My attorney arranged a meeting with the county mediator before either side spent months fighting. Through civil court, Linda arrived carrying a thick binder labeled Community Safety Program, and for the first time, she looked genuinely confident rather than simply stubborn. I quietly placed my own evidence on the conference table: the recorded deed, the certified parcel map, the archived newsletters from the former management company, the locksmith work order, the inspection video, the temporary camera footage showing Linda inside my cabin. One by one, the mediator reviewed every document without interruption. When he finished, he turned toward Linda and asked a simple question. Can you produce any recorded document proving this property belongs to the association? She could not. Instead, she repeated that every cabin owner had voluntarily participated in the emergency access program for years. The mediator responded that voluntary participation could never create authority over property outside the recorded declaration. For a brief moment, the entire room became quiet. Linda finally agreed that the association would suspend future inspections until ownership and access rights could be fully reviewed. It sounded like exactly the outcome I had hoped for. Even better, later that afternoon, the locksmith formally admitted in writing that the duplicate key had been produced without verifying ownership, and the company agreed to cooperate with any future legal proceedings. Driving home, I honestly believed the worst part of the dispute had finally ended. That feeling lasted less than 24 hours. Early the next morning, I received a certified envelope from the Homeowners Association attorney. Inside was not an apology, but a formal demand letter. They accused me of interfering with community safety operations and warned that my refusal to participate in the emergency access program created unreasonable risks for neighboring properties during fires, gas leaks, or medical emergencies. Attached to the letter was a new version of the supposed emergency access authorization bearing the same forged signature, but now it included a notarization dated only 6 months earlier. My attorney immediately recognized another problem. Challenging a forged signature was one issue. Challenging a notarized document required proving not only that I had never signed it, but also how the notarization had been obtained. Before we could even begin preparing that response, another surprise arrived. A deputy sheriff called to inform me that the association had requested a civil standby later that week because they anticipated a dispute over access to my cabin during a scheduled safety inspection. The deputy carefully explained that civil standbys did not determine ownership, but deputies often remained present to prevent confrontations while people asserted competing claims. Suddenly, I understood Linda's real strategy. She was no longer trying to convince me that I should hand over my key. She was trying to create enough official-looking paperwork that responding deputies would believe she already had lawful authority to use one. My attorney looked across his desk, tapped the forged authorization with his pen, and quietly said, "Changing another lock will not solve this anymore. As long as any ordinary key can open that door, they will keep finding ways to claim they have the right one." I drove away from my attorney's office without heading home. Instead, I stopped outside a commercial security supplier where I had spent nearly 20 years helping banks, laboratories, and government contractors design controlled access systems. I sat in my truck looking at my father's old brass key before placing it back into my pocket. He had been right all along. The key itself was never the problem. The problem was that everyone believed possession of a key created authority. That assumption had fueled every false inspection, every duplicate, every forged document, and every unnecessary visit to my cabin. By the time I walked into the supplier, I had already abandoned the idea of protecting a lock. I was going to eliminate the entire argument. Over the next several days, I hired a licensed installation crew that specialized in high-security commercial entrances. Every permit required by the county was pulled before work began because I wanted every improvement documented from the first bolt to the final inspection. The old wooden entry door came off its hinges and was replaced with a reinforced steel vault door designed for remote research facilities. There was no traditional key cylinder anywhere on its surface. Instead, access required encrypted biometric authentication supported by a fingerprint reader, an internal controller, battery backup, and a tamper-resistant audit log that recorded every attempted entry with an exact date and time. The original brass key from my father still fit the decorative outer handle, but the handle no longer controlled the locking mechanism. It had become a keepsake instead of a security device. Before activating the new system, I invited the county building inspector to verify that the installation complied with every applicable code. He signed the final inspection report without requesting a single correction. My attorney immediately added that report to our growing file because it established that the new entry system had been lawfully installed after all required permits had been approved. 2 days later, I received another notice from the Homeowners Association announcing that the postponed safety inspection had been rescheduled for Friday morning. Linda clearly believed the forged authorization and duplicate key would finally force the issue. I made no attempt to argue with her. Instead, I replied through my attorney that I would be present at the property during the announced inspection time. That response appeared to satisfy everyone. What Linda did not know was that the new door automatically stored every failed authentication attempt and simultaneously uploaded encrypted records to secure cloud storage beyond anyone's physical reach. Early Friday morning, I placed my father's brass key into my jacket pocket, drove to the cabin, and quietly unlocked the outer handle before resting my thumb against the biometric reader. The heavy steel door released with a soft click while the display identified me as the verified owner. Less than 10 minutes later, I watched 3 vehicles climb the driveway together. Linda stepped out first carrying a thick ring of keys. Behind her stood the association attorney. Behind them stood 2 sheriff's deputies assigned to the requested civil standby. The deputies greeted everyone politely, but made it clear within the first minute that they were present only to keep the peace while a civil disagreement unfolded. That mattered because Linda immediately tried to shift the conversation toward authority instead of ownership. She handed the association attorney the notarized emergency access document and pointed toward my front door as though the issue had already been decided. My attorney calmly requested that every discussion take place on the porch where everyone could hear the same facts at the same time. I agreed without hesitation. There was no reason to rush anymore. Every important decision had already been made days earlier. Linda insisted the association possessed the legal right to conduct the scheduled inspection and argued that my refusal created unnecessary risks for neighboring properties. My attorney answered by placing the recorded deed, the certified parcel map, and the county building inspection approval for the new entrance system on a small folding table I had set outside before anyone arrived. The deputies quietly examined the documents but avoided taking sides. One of them simply confirmed that the property records identified me as the legal owner. Linda responded by producing the duplicate key created by the locksmith. She held it in the air as though it proved everything she had been claiming for weeks. Instead of arguing about the key, I asked one simple question. If that key gives you legal authority, why did the association need a notarized authorization too? The question lingered unanswered. For the first time, the association attorney looked toward Linda instead of toward me. She quickly changed the subject and announced that the inspection needed to proceed before further delays created liability for the community. My attorney reminded everyone that the Homeowners Association had already agreed through mediation to suspend inspections while the ownership dispute remained unresolved. Linda answered that the new authorization resolved that issue. My attorney quietly replied that the authenticity of that authorization remained disputed and that relying upon it carried significant legal consequences if it proved false. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody stepped toward the door. Yet the tension became heavier than it had ever been because everyone understood that the next decision would determine far more than a routine inspection. Linda finally walked toward the entrance carrying the duplicate key from the locksmith. She confidently inserted it into the decorative handle exactly as she had done before. The handle turned smoothly, and a faint smile crossed her face. Then she pushed against the steel door. Nothing happened. She tried again with greater force, glanced at the deputies, and announced that the lock must have been defective. Without saying a word, I pointed toward the biometric reader mounted beside the frame. Its display remained dark until my hand approached, and beneath the sensor a small engraved plate reflected the morning sunlight with 6 simple words. Authorized biometric verification required beyond this point. Linda stared at the panel for several seconds before slowly reaching toward it, and every person standing on that porch knew the next few moments would decide whether every key she had collected was about to become completely worthless. Linda hesitated for only a second before pressing her thumb against the biometric reader. The screen illuminated with a soft white glow, paused while processing, then displayed a simple message large enough for everyone standing on the porch to read. Authentication failed. Unauthorized biometric profile. At the same moment, a quiet tone sounded from inside the cabin, followed by another line appearing beneath the first. Entry attempt recorded. Linda immediately pulled her hand away and insisted the system must have been malfunctioning. The association attorney stepped forward and asked whether there was an emergency override. I calmly answered that the system had been designed specifically so that no ordinary key, copied key, master key, or administrative shortcut could bypass the owner verification process. My attorney handed the deputies a copy of the county inspection approval, showing that the entry system had been legally installed and inspected only days earlier. One deputy carefully compared the address on the report with the cabin in front of us before returning the document without comment. Linda was not ready to give up. She removed the duplicate key from her purse again and argued that possessing a working key demonstrated the association's long-standing emergency access authority. I reminded everyone that the decorative handle still accepted the original key profile because I had intentionally preserved my father's hardware, but the handle no longer controlled the locking system. The duplicate key proved only that someone had copied a mechanical pattern. It proved nothing about legal authority to enter private property. The association attorney asked whether I would voluntarily open the door for the scheduled inspection. I answered that I had always allowed lawful inspections requested by the proper public authorities with proper notice. What I had refused from the beginning was unauthorized entry by an organization that did not govern my property. Linda interrupted and claimed I had modified the entrance only to defeat the association's emergency access program. My attorney quietly placed the mediation agreement on the table, highlighting the section where the association had agreed to suspend inspections while the ownership dispute remained unresolved. He then laid the locksmith records beside it, followed by the video stills showing Linda entering my cabin with the unauthorized duplicate key before any biometric system existed. The sequence of documents spoke more clearly than any argument could. The deputies remained neutral, but one of them looked directly at Linda and asked whether she had entered the cabin before receiving permission from the owner. Instead of answering directly, she pointed toward the notarized authorization and insisted she had relied on the document in good faith. My attorney responded by placing the questioned authorization beside the certified deed, then beside the archived newsletters proving the emergency key policy had never existed during the previous management company, and finally beside the locksmith work order identifying the unnamed property access coordinator rather than me. The entire timeline now sat on one table in chronological order, leaving almost no room for misunderstanding. The biometric reader suddenly chimed again because every failed access attempt automatically updated its audit log. I reached into my jacket, removed my father's old brass key, held it in my open palm for a moment, and slipped it back into my pocket before placing my thumb against the scanner. Every eye turned toward the steel door as the lock disengaged with a solid mechanical click, and everyone standing on that porch knew the records waiting inside were about to determine who had been telling the truth from the very beginning. The steel door swung inward without hesitation, and I stepped inside while the deputies, my attorney, Linda, and the association attorney remained on the porch where everyone could see exactly what happened next. I walked straight to the kitchen counter and opened the secured document drawer that had remained untouched throughout the dispute. Inside sat the original cloud backup receipts, installation records, camera archive index, and the printed audit log generated by the biometric system only moments earlier. I handed the fresh log to my attorney first. It listed every failed authentication attempt made that morning, complete with exact times matching the deputy's body camera timestamps. Then I opened the monitoring application and replayed the preserved recordings from weeks earlier. Linda appeared entering my cabin with the duplicate key, directing the maintenance worker through each room while photographs were taken and notes were copied. The recording ended with her locking the door and placing the duplicate key into her own purse. No one spoke for several seconds. The deputies compared the recording with the locksmith work order identifying the unnamed property access coordinator, then with the mediation agreement suspending inspections, then with the county parcel records proving the cabin had never belonged to the association. The sequence matched perfectly. Nothing depended on guesses or opinions anymore. The association attorney slowly lowered the notarized authorization and admitted he had never seen the earlier video before that morning. He quietly advised Linda to stop attempting entry immediately. One deputy explained that ownership of the cabin was not in dispute based on the recorded deed, and that any future attempt to enter without permission could expose those involved to additional civil or criminal consequences depending on the circumstances. My attorney informed everyone that the complete evidence package, including the questioned authorization, locksmith records, inspection video, certified property records, archived newsletters, mediation documents, and biometric audit logs, would be preserved for the pending civil proceedings. Faced with the complete timeline, the association agreed through counsel to withdraw every inspection request involving my property, revoke all claims that my cabin fell under its emergency access program, and provide written confirmation that no association representative would retain or request any key or access credential for the property again. The locksmith later updated its internal verification procedures to require proof of ownership before producing duplicates for private residences, and the association formally rescinded its unofficial key collection practice after legal review exposed that it had never been supported by the recorded governing documents. A few weeks later, I returned to the cabin alone. The same porch where a deputy had once told me to step away from my own front door was completely quiet. I slipped my father's old brass key from my pocket and turned the decorative handle out of habit. It still moved exactly as it always had, but it no longer decided who could enter. I rested my thumb against the biometric reader, heard the familiar click, and walked inside knowing that ownership was finally protected by both the law and the system I had built. I still keep my cabin keys, but they are no longer what protects my home. Justice locked the right door.